People don't really talk about the Xbox version of BTD6 that much. I did some digging and watched pretty much every single Xbox BTD6 video on YouTube, and they're all really surface level. Like, we get it, there's couch co-op and the maps are wider, but like, multiple of the people reviewing the game said that it's basically the same game as the PC version, and that just couldn't be further from the truth. Not only is this a super rushed port, but even the core gameplay, it's so incredibly different because there's so many new bugs you can abuse and there's so many new bugs you get abused by. And there just hasn't been a review of this game that quite does it justice. Let's get the obvious stuff out of the way for the people who haven't seen the Xbox version before. The game is played on 32.0, and the gameplay difference that you'll notice the fastest from this footage is that the maps are actually larger. The tracks themselves are longer, more placeable area. Some of these map extensions actually look pretty well made. Some of them don't, and a few of them are just a little bit strange. And of course, the controls are changed as well. I'm sure that everybody clicking on this video thought that having the cursor controlled by your movement stick would be just miserable, and all of you are completely correct actually. This is the most unfun part of the game. But there are a few things that make it work. You can hold down left trigger to activate nudge mode, and pressing L3 selects the most recent tower that you used, so it's not completely unusable at least. If you click on a tower, it brings up a control panel that's actually pretty usable. I'll talk more about it in the race and boss sections, but for the most part, these controls are better than I expected them to be. And of course, the most important thing, you get double robo-targeting. Okay, done with the basics, now it's time for the actual review. We'll start off with the most popular part of the game, the couch co-op. If you connect multiple controllers to one Xbox, you can play co-op locally. Every single YouTube video about this game mentions the couch co-op, and I can see why. It's a co-op game without any of the co-op lag, it's local on one device, which is pretty rare to see in this day and age, and for some reason it has like a fighting game character select screen. But chances are, if you've seen any other video about Xbox balloons, you've heard all of this already. But I haven't actually seen anybody talk about what's, in my opinion, the most important part of couch co-op. It doesn't actually give you co-op medals, it gives you the single-player medals. This gives you the option to practically just skip the first 40 rounds of any chimps game. You can just plug in a player 2 and get your co-op starting cash in a game that would otherwise give you a single-player medal. Hell, even with just 2 players, you can start chimps with 4 shooty turrets, even without buying Geraldo, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. Point is that early game grinding isn't really even a thing on this version because there's an option to just skip it entirely. Now, despite the fact that couch co-op is done entirely on one device, you still can't pause the game, and you can't even back it out and make a save. It still has the regular inconveniences that co-op would have, for no real reason other than the fact that it's probably entirely reused code from actual co-op. Speaking of which, online co-op is still in this game. There's a fully functional system that gives co-op medals and has everything the Steam version has. Well, everything except for one thing, the actual players. Yeah, you aren't going to ever find a match here unless you're specifically coordinating with someone. Don't bother trying to get co-op medals in this game, you aren't going to 100% it. Next up, we got the events. I'll start with bosses because that's what a lot of people, myself included, thought would be good about this version. It's 32.0, so there's no least cash, no least tiers, and the leaderboards are empty enough to not worry about things like bug abuse or getting sniped or any of that drama. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, I'll preface this by saying I'm not a boss player. I've always found it to be less interesting than races or chimps, so maybe I'm biased here. But I thought that the boss events were the biggest disappointment of this version. There's 2 main reasons for this. The first is the events themselves. There are only 2 bosses in this game, Lich and Vortex. There were Bloonarius events in the past, but as of the last 3 months or so, there hasn't been a single one. I'd assume this is a bug that'll be fixed, but for now we're stuck with just the 2 bosses. The event rules are simple. No modifiers ever, no restrictions ever, 850 starting cash on medium standard. It's only the map that changes. This sounds fine and all, but then you realize that these are the only 2 boss events you'll get, ever. Honestly, I just couldn't be bothered to keep playing them once I realized that I would be doing the exact same strategy on the exact same event every 2 weeks. But maybe that doesn't matter to you. Maybe you're like Sisyphus with your rock and you're perfectly happy to play full stats, no restrictions, Lich and Vortex for the rest of your life. And there are certainly people who are. I see like these 2 people on the leaderboard every week. so there's certainly someone who likes doing this. Just a fair warning that if you're here for the bosses, you'll need to be more than a little bit insane to be playing for more than 2 weeks. All of that was just the first reason. The second one is that it can be miserable to play with console controls. Things like dragging your slow-ass cursor across a screen full of factories genuinely sucks. And the lag on Xbox is so much more annoying than on any other version. You see, on Steam, the game performance is separated from mouse movement, so even if it's lagging on Steam, you can still control the game perfectly fine, even if it's a little bit slow. But on Xbox, if the game lags, your cursor lags too, and it's not fun. It is genuinely difficult to spam Spike Storm abilities or Rejuve potions. I've only done one boss event where I've tried to do this on one of these Elite Vortex runs. I was just trying to complete it. This is my first boss event ever, so I wasn't going for a good time. But I still ended up top 1 on the leaderboard because I was the only submission, if that tells you how dead leaderboards are. Anyways, the point here is that it is actively unfun to play boss runs in this version in a way that it's really not on any other version. So overall, I think bosses are a pretty big letdown, but if you're a more active boss player than I am, I would certainly appreciate your input here. It is fairly subjective. Also, 2 more quick things. The penalty timer in this version is a flat 10 seconds past the last balloon of the round, which honestly feels kind of miserable after getting used to Steam's scaling penalty system. And also, the game softlocks a pretty decent amount in bosses just in general. So those are 2 more things that you can work around, but you're going to have to look out for. Now on to the other event. Honestly, I didn't expect races to be this much fun. Just like bosses, there's basically nobody on the leaderboard. Surprisingly, races are even less active than bosses. There's usually 1 or 2 people who actually try on each boss event, but on every single race I've done, I've been the only one who's really put up a half-decent score. But unlike bosses, race events are actually copied over from past Steam races, so they're pretty diverse, and I think they've been pretty good, pretty simple, pretty fun. And surprisingly, despite how awfully this game runs, races don't lag all that much. Obviously, there's still the problem of bad controls, but as I kept playing races, I actually didn't mind it that much. The fact that there's a maximum speed that your cursor can move, and also you have to manually drag to get a new tower type, is annoying and removes a lot of mechanical skill, but it's also a new element of strategy that you get to work with. And this might just be me, but I kinda like the more relaxed cursor movement. You're always moving the cursor to accomplish something, but the fact that there's a cap on how fast you're allowed to do things makes it feel a lot more laid back, and adds a decent amount of strategy to compensate for it. Overall, I think Xbox races are genuinely one of the most fun things I've done in any Balloons game, really. Despite being the most simple and unchanged part of this version, I think it's the thing that works the best. Maybe there's a little bit of bias. I won't deny that I'm a little bit nostalgic for these simple events from years ago, and maybe blowing out everyone's scores by a full minute makes it a little bit more fun to grind races than it otherwise would be with real competition. But I do think Xbox races are a really good game mode. Oh, and the best part about the race events is that none of them have
Geraldo, at your service.
So just a reminder, this is the Steam equivalent of 32.0, which means that Geraldo is overpowered and almost every other hero sucks. This isn't the best Geraldo has ever been, not by a long shot, but there's still a ton of overpowered things that haven't been nerfed yet. Whitestone still gives damage, Pickles still give way too much fortified damage, and he costs 650. But there's actually one new thing that Geraldo can abuse in this version. It's a bug I'm gonna call the Phantom Shop. You see, when you restart the game with Geraldo's shop open, the shop stays open and fully usable too. This means that you can start the game with Geraldo items even before buying Geraldo. Now, obviously this isn't intended behavior, so there are a few special mechanics with this new shop. First off, the shop never levels and it never restocks its items. Second, the shop keeps its levels from the previous games, so you can access any items if you leveled him up. But that has one exception: the upgraded version of items don't work. The game actually does recognize that you don't have a Geraldo leveled up enough to have the upgraded items, so trying to place one of them will actually place its unupgraded version, and of course, once you close the shop, it's gone for good. An interesting side note here, if you buy things from his Phantom Shop, when you place your actual Geraldo, he'll have some of his stock missing. It's actually pretty important that the best generalist hero in the game has this tech. It's applicable in chimps, you can start the game with shooty turrets. It's applicable in bosses, you can start with 1 turret and 1 NFT, which acts like you placed it on round 1. And if Geraldo were ever to be allowed in a race, you could instantly send up to round 27 and then place a blade trap on it. It's also worth noting that, because it's 32.0, the restock bug still exists. That means if you buy an item while it's at full stock, it takes one more round to recharge than it otherwise would have. This is really important if you're stacking Paragon Totems, because they have a recharge of 1 round. Oh, and while we're on the topic of old bugs... yeah, nothing got fixed. You can still give any tower in the game 1,000 times its attack speed. You can still turn Lich into a vegetable just by exiting and re-entering, and some towers just are simply broken. I won't go into too much detail since none of this is new information, but the 10 patches that Xbox got didn't fix any of the old bugs. The only thing that's really worth discussing here is that it's a little bit harder to do some of the more game-breaking bugs, because on Steam, BTD6 runs into bugs all the time, it just keeps on playing the game. But on Xbox, if there's something the game doesn't understand, it will usually just crash. And this crashing is something that happens a little bit more than I'd like it to. This game's performance is just so bad, like the worst that this series has ever seen. Not only does it take forever to load things and it's super prone to crashing, but models in this game aren't actually loaded in until they're needed to be, meaning that sometimes you're just going to have a Moab appear halfway into the track. Even things like placing and upgrading towers can feel unresponsive in this game, and that's while the game's running smoothly. The second the game starts lagging, things become really unbearable, meaning that it can genuinely be hard to do things like open Geraldo's shop or spam abilities if it's lagging. I'd say the game is definitely playable, but this is the worst that BTD6 has ever run. For now. So, those are the key points of this version. Would I recommend this game? No, obviously not. It's a rushed and broken port. But I do think there's some unique enjoyment to be had from this game, even if the majority of it is just because of how broken it is. I think this video has been comprehensive enough on the main points, but there really isn't a way to put the Xbox experience into words. Hundreds of random little things are broken for every big flaw I've mentioned, so I'll just end this video out with a handful of little jank moments I've had so far. What I didn't play this boss. My rewards got duped. Okay, now I have twice the amount of boss medals as I do actual boss completions. Is that the race clock? Wow, that looked good. No, it isn't. My controller is fine. It's not disconnected. I don't need to plug anything in. Get this shit off my screen. What is wrong with this island? Why is it like that? Okay. It says I can place it. Let me place it. Oh, but I can't click on the abilities? Why not? Use them manually, I guess. Just let me click on them. They're abilities. That's what the icons are there for. Oh, I just bought Monkey Sense and increased the range. It says it increases range. Wait, that's a 35.0 change. When are these descriptions from? There's so many hotkeys available. Why do you have brambles and tree targeting on the exact same one? Okay, that's it. Bye.